Welcome to Mots, where we'll be applying the Manzer or Mosi-Thurlow scale of quantitative analysis of pop culture narrative through a binary system.
Or Mots! This podcast contains spoilers, mature content, and language. Viewer discretion advised. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Mots, where we are reviewing HBO's Westworld Season 1. I'm your host, and also a host, Jonathan Ian Malcolm Manzer, here with Stephen Ramosi.
Hello.
Scott Thurlow.
And welcome to another loop.
And Christopher Morgan.
Hello.
So, Scott, would you like to start out with a funny log line?
Sure. So I came up with a bunch of them trying to combine sort of elements of everything we saw, but I settled upon human time is over. This is the age of the superhost.
So, like our normal reviews of TV shows, we're combining intro, body, and conclusion together. So we'll wrap up synopsis and intro, body, and conclusion with Stephen Ramosi.
Mm-hmm. And I am going to try to do a brief overview here, just because I think that the most important thing that we're going to talk about today is themes. So we're going to try and get through the body, intro, and conclusion and talk about the things that the meat of what we really want to get to. So basically, we start off with this epic, sweeping world that we're kind of dropped into as the viewers. We are introduced to a bunch of characters who we very quickly find out are basically robots that are put in this place, in this theme park, for the guests of the theme park. We're introduced to the guy who's running it, Robert Ford, who is played by... I just blanked on Anthony Hopkins. Jesus Christ. We're also very quickly introduced to a bunch of other characters who I think we'll probably get to more.
Other people are there too.
Yeah. But
and just like the title says, it takes place in the West, which I think you failed to mention.
Sorry. Well, it doesn't take place in the West. It takes place in some place that is supposed to be like the Wild West.
Of it, yes.
Right. I think in the second episode, we're introduced to the man in the white hat, basically, who kind of provides an immediate counterpoint for the man in the black hat, who's played by Ed Harris. They kind of go off and have their own storylines. The man in white has this kind of storyline that builds out throughout of him being a hero of the West. You know, he's trying to save one of the hosts. The man in black, meanwhile, is just taking full advantage of the fact that he doesn't believe that, that these hosts have no consciousness. He doesn't see them as human and is kind of being a horrible villain. While that's happening, there's also intrigue going on in the, I'm going to call it like the basement, kind of the
inner workings behind the park.
The internal section of the park is.
I want to jump in for a second because I've been listening to your description of the show and trying to capture every single important aspect of this when it's impossible to.
It really is. It's difficult.
So you have your Western hero and villain themes. You have your corporate intrigue, and you have your Blade Runner style, do androids dream of electric horses, I suppose. In this.
Nice. I should have used that as my logline. I like it, though.
This is, like HBO tends to do, a very well done show with balancing with balancing all these different narratives going on.
Right.
But I don't know how you could concisely describe this work.
Perhaps we should leave it. It's important that you know that it is a Western. It's important that you know that it involves
corporate espionage, corporate
espionage.
Dealings.
It's important that it involves, the problem of consciousness, and it's important, or it's a great, turning point in the show when you find out that even if you had already, thought this, that when you find out that there are multiple timelines involved, because it was woven together so well the entire time that you had no idea that this was going on in more than one space for most of it if you hadn't thought about it.
Sure. Jonathan Nolan style is all over it, but that's all true and accurate, and keep in consideration, and also keep in mind that we assume whoever's listening to this has seen the plot itself.
So perhaps I'll just, that's kind of all the middle part that I've already talked about. Perhaps,
and if you've not shut us off and you've not seen it, we just spoiled a shit ton. So.
yeah, there's no reason to watch it anymore. Except for that, it's amazing.
Oh, you have to watch it. I'm just saying that even in your brief description that's vague, I'm like sitting here going, there's so much to the show that like it's not hard to spoil the show at all.
There is. And perhaps at this point, we'll just kind of go to the end, which is heavily involved in the problem of consciousness, and it involves Dolores, one of the main characters, probably, if not the main host. Well, she's definitely the main host protagonist. We'll say that.
Yes. I like that description.
Having a choice for the first time in her life, really, and making a decision, really, for the first time in her life that wasn't planned out by some algorithm. We assume. Now, that's not necessarily true, but that's what it's made to look like at the end.
It's very heavily implied
at the end of the episode, yes. And she ends up killing someone to. I guess I might as well spoil it anyway. She ends up killing Ford to
achieve freedom and consciousness.
Yeah, basically to prove that she is a conscious being, and I guess I'll leave it. I'll leave it there. There's a bunch of other stuff that happens, but none of it really important to the plot.
So there's a lot of meta narrative going on in this show, and I thought it was very interesting that they have the hosts who are forced to repeat their lives over and over and over again in kind of a hell on earth, if you will, of watching their loved ones die the same way every single time. Whatever the narrator said is the fate that they're like Sisyphus rolling up the same boulder every day. And depending on how benevolent the god was, is how great
how good the boulder looks.
Yes. And it's funny because I can now watch the show on repeat. So I can watch the actors watching them do the exact same actions every single day about being hosts performing the same actions every single day. So bring a little bit of meta-narrative commentary into
You can watch this show mentally somehow.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's great. But, I mean, that's kind of the intro, body, and conclusion.
It's the best we can do given the nature of all this.
There is a lot more to it, so just watch it if you haven't. I don't know why you're still listening if you haven't watched it, but watch it.
Yes.
It'd be easier to watch all 10 and a half hours than it would be for us to sit here and explain everything to you.
Sure. But go ahead.
And nor do I think it's important that because everyone else watching, like so many podcasts that I was watching were explaining it poorly over like trying to figure out, what does this specific thing mean? And I think that all the nitpicks you can make and all the what could this mean is really the unimportant part of what makes Westworld great. I think it's the greater themes that a lot of this have to do. But when it goes to narrative structure, it was like the Nolan brothers tend to do, perfectly.
Well, it's just Jonathan, but it's a Nolan-esque trait, sure.
And I was engrossed from the first episode and to the very last speech given in the final episode. So I have to give this a very strong 3.
Yeah, hell yeah, same thing.
I'm going to give it a 3 as well, but with a small caveat. I was a little bit unsure after watching just the first episode about this show. And not that I wasn't going to like it. I know that I was going to like at least the first season, but it felt very Lost-ish to me.
Well, JJ was a producer,
and I know I know where that train goes. So, like,
he's seen that loop before.
I'm still a little bit worried, but at this point, I think that they have answered enough questions, which Lost never friggin' did, to alleviate some of that.
At the end of J.J. Abrams' maze is a mystery box.
Yeah.
At the end of Jonathan Nolan's maze is our answers.
Yes.
So
indeed.
Yeah.
Well, all right.
That's amazing. Check out our TED Talks episode.
Okay, you're giving it. All right, I'm going to give it a strong 3, and with this saying that if this were a 10-part miniseries, if it ended where it ended, I'd be completely satisfied too. And
I agree.
I think that's a great credit to it. That
standalones almost, if you will, even if they're going to make another season.
Yeah, because even with the Batman movies, Christopher Nolan went into each one assuming there wasn't going to be making another one, but was able. So he answered the questions for that one while opening the door to the next movie.
Yeah,
leaving the door open for the next movie.
So you giving it a 3 then, Steve-O? Even if you're originally unsure.
I'm giving it a 3. Yeah.
Me too. Yes, for sure.
Okay, and now I'm going to move into themes. So I give a forewarning and an apology ahead of time. Because my philosophical brain could not stop running while watching the show, which I ended up marathoning in one whole day. So, original Westworld was created by Michael Crichton.
Yep.
And obvious influences there. If you watch Jurassic Park, which I grew up on, at first I thought perhaps Michael Crichton had been sexually molested by at Disney World or something like that to have such a poor view of theme parks. But I realized that it's actually the perfect avenue for exploring development of closed system of life in a closed system, which is really interesting, especially since both Jurassic Park and Westworld, the people thought they had complete control, but they created like a selective permeable membrane, as is called in biology, which allows certain items into a closed system, but controls what can go in and what can go out. And the idea of, as I mentioned Ian Malcolm earlier, with the chaos theory, with the idea of how things will fall apart within that system. But though it's unlike Jurassic Park, which dealt with nature and biology evolving beyond human control, this felt slightly different because of the AI aspect.
Well, I mean, you can insert technology there instead, but right, I'm not saying it's a 1-to-1 ratio, but it's something similar.
But because it had to have kind of inner sabotage,
yes,
which Jurassic Park didn't need. Although, and the development of consciousness, especially the open-ended questions over who actually had agency among the hosts and even among the people themselves, as that's explored, which I will in a bit. There's that kind of big open questions into what is required for an AI to develop this consciousness. So now I want to bring up Voltaire for a moment.
Of course you do.
Which I've done a lot of research into. And there's a work he wrote called Plato's Dream, which deals with the concept that it's Plato of ancient Greek fame having a dream about the crater in the Greek mythos being back when Voltaire was writing, there was a big thing called optimism, Leibniz's optimism, which dealt with that this world had to be the best of all worlds because God created it. And God being a benevolent creature that creates life, why would he give us a world that exists that was not as perfect as it could be? So Voltaire proposed through Plato's Dream that, well, maybe like the benevolent God that you think of created the universe, but the Demogorgon of that recently from Stranger Things, what if it created the Earth? Which is, it's not a perfect being and it's a malevolent creature. So I thought it was interesting to have Ford in here being very a representation of God, but not being a benevolent God.
Sure.
Chris, you want to?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm going to spoil the ending of the book of Jurassic Park. I thought the movie was a way lesser version, but like both in Westworld, as I remember I haven't seen the movie in 30 years.
The original 1973.
But both that and Jurassic Park are kind of Frankenstein stories. And
you son of a bitch, that was going to be what I was going to say next. But I mean, it makes sense.
But but at the end of Jurassic Park, the book, once they got away from the island, they bombed the island and basically killed all the dinosaurs save for the velociraptors that escaped. So you have that Frankenstein story where, I thought it was interesting at this one how they decided how it came full circle. And I think growing on Blade Runner and the new Battlestar Galactica always has this creation thing. There's always kind of like these biblical references, obviously, but there always does come a point where we talk about, who's going to live, who's going to die, how is it going to happen? It's like, do you kill your creation or not? And I'm still trying to wrap my head around the ending of it. Or
just have your creation kill you.
Yeah, exactly. What Ford's last narrative was.
I definitely his last narrative has a lot of like philosophical implications, which I was going to go into when we discuss protagonists. But I have two more things I just want to quickly mention, which is to bring it back to your comment about Lost. John Locke, who was referenced in the named character, and dealt quite a bit with the idea of like theory of consciousness, and that's based off of memories. Is what links what allows human beings to possess and carry on through time. So I felt it was interesting that Westworld based the consciousness of the hosts off of memory, and did a much better job without ever referencing John Locke than Lost did in representing the similar ideas of John Locke with having a character named.
Sure. I mean, this is a very intellectual show, I would say, generally.
Yes.
And it's like some of the things they sort of assume, this might go to dialogue, but it's sort of related to what you're saying, that they just drop in early on. If you guys remember, they drop in a line that, the host passed the Turing test years ago. Like, and no, like, it's just assumed. They answer that for you. Like, if you were wondering even about that, like, I wonder how he would measure up to the Turing test. Boom. They included that line and then we go on.
Yeah. And this show never underestimates its audience. It never.
Sure.
Beth and I were talking about it last night.
Who's Beth?
My wife.
Just to be clear.
We were talking about it last night. cause we were figuring things out like right before they would, we figured out who Wyatt was like 2 minutes before it was revealed. The show gives you enough information so nothing's like, pulled out of your ass.
They're not playing cheap games with you.
But they're also not trying to spell it out for you in every last detail, like the Turing test. It's got to be brought up. You bring it up in normal conversation, you leave it alone.
I had that exact same reaction. But the idea of, could you actually develop consciousness by having memories and then improvisation, and then that would develop into consciousness? I'm actually now debating in my head whether that is an effective method of producing an AI. But one last thing is also the duality in both the hosts and the person. Obviously, the William Man Black Hat, Dolores also being Wyatt. You have so many, Bernard also being Arnold. I don't know necessarily what the greater theme to that is, but it's something I noticed and haven't really explored much because as of yet in my own mind. But there is a lot, as I just vomited out on all of you. I apologize. Detailing like with a lot of deep themes in this that, again, I think everyone's focusing on, is this person a host or not? No, that's not what's
not really the important part.
No.
Exactly.
What's important here is,
I think we agree on that. All of us.
What is consciousness and things like that.
All right. So I have one thing to possibly debate you on. I don't know if so. Like you just mentioned, you said that that consciousness is based on memory in terms of this, and I think that there's a slight detour from that in the thinking of in the philosophy of Westworld. It's basically that memory, because there are several hosts that have memory, but none of them have consciousness until Dolores gets it at the end, right? So I think that the idea is that you do not attain consciousness until you've gone through enough pain in life or in your life to really connect to those memories. And like that's why they say like one of the most effective cornerstones, because all the hosts have cornerstones in their memory banks that they go back to time and time again, just like Bernard goes back to his dead son.
May I rebut that quickly? Or not rebut, but like build off of that quickly. The idea is that I don't say that memory is the direct, it's the necessary bedrock for the consciousness to develop, but also that suffering is necessary for memories to be effective and for choice to develop, because you need to have the memory of some fire being painful,
right,
in order for you not to light yourself on fire.
Right. The idea of building off of your failures or building off of things that didn't work is so important to consciousness, at least in terms of this show. And I think that's a lot of what they're trying to say.
Well, I agree with both of all that. Of course, I like to think so. They sort of outright point those things out. Specifically, Ford gives a speech about how suffering. Arnold discovered that suffering was sort of like necessary, as you said, to incorporate with all that. So there's also, if not a recurring thing, they brought it up a couple of times where his theory was a pyramid. So it starts with memory, as you're saying, then you have improvisation, and then the final tip of the pyramid is true consciousness. Except they realized it was not that, it was a maze. But it's almost like it's an arrow going between them, like an equal thing, right? And then that will bring you to like a big C almost circling that equation, if I had to describe it mathematically. There's one other thing I want to mention, you were talking about a little bit before, E. Yeah, like, it's almost, again, they're perpetrating a meta joke upon the audience because trying to figure all this stuff out. It's like, here's a maze for you, viewer. Figure it all out. We're giving you the clues and stuff.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I agree with all of the thing you just said, and it's all very well incorporated.
We're going to go into Maeve later, but I thought it was interesting because
I said maze.
No, but I said Maeve, as in the character Maeve.
We're stuck in a dialogue loop. Chris, lose all scripted responses. Improvisation only.
Because Maeve, this one character who plays the Madam of the Saloon, starts to put pieces together that, she remembers the last duties of this last host. And long story short, that eventually she figures out a way to get out of the park, that she's kind of rebelling. And one of the things you learned about her was that was part of the narrative, that she was programmed to rebel. So like this whole thing is, I immediately thought of like Ford's God, how they say God has a plan for all of us. Like, I thought it was interesting the way, Maeve thought she had this control, and then she was like, you're programmed to do this. And Maeve's like, no, this came from me. And she was going to leave and not look back. And then when she got the coordinates from where her daughter was, which,
quote unquote, daughter from the past life.
Yeah. Daughter from the past life. And who, how did that guy get the coordinates? Was that part of the plan and everything? She decides to go back for it. And I just thought it was really interesting to like how control is exercised, and that Maeve's a very good example of that.
Well, it brought up another point I wanted to make, and I'll build off that, which is the idea of agency in this world. Because the hosts obviously are programmed to live out scripts, but it seems that almost every single male who comes into this world goes by this, in a sense, a certain script.
Sure, no, I know what you're saying.
And you see the same kind of actions over and over again. Yeah, they're different people, but like it's almost like pre-triggered. And actually, William, in a way, breaks off of that whole thing. And that's what's so fascinating about the tragedy behind him becoming the Man in Black, is that, yeah, he gets full control, but he is now stuck in a script of trying to find meaning over something that was so, he found meaning in one thing in his life with Dolores.
It's supposed to be an amusement.
Yeah,
sure.
And he spent the rest of his life obsessed over Westworld, trying to find meaning in it. And again, like he lost his consciousness and humanity, pursuing the attempts of the hosts becoming conscious themselves.
Yeah. Okay. It depends how you spell conscious there, but I know what you mean, like which one you mean. So I just want to make a couple more things that sort of again unrelated, but I thought of outright while I was watching. So evolution, I think as a whole, was one that like Ford gives a speech about it, and ostensibly you think Bernard sort of parrots him, but really it was Arnold. I took it as giving that speech to the original Dolores, and Ford spits it back to Bernard. Bernard is also one of the funny things I came upon when talking about this show. Spits it back to him years later. So like he comes to realize that this is the next step in evolution. And related to that, they also give a couple of speeches, short little clips devoted to how the mistake, like you said, like you have to learn from your mistakes. You can't remember your mistakes, i.e. memory, then you can't learn and evolve to anything. Mm-hmm. And one more thing to what you said, one of my favorite parts is, the William arc of him coming to the park and sort of being seduced by it, as Logan says it does to everybody, but then seduced in a much different way than the normal, like, random guest of his demographic would be. So, and at the end, Man in Black, Ed Harris, that is, at that point, gives a speech saying how this park isn't real, but it somehow feels more real than reality itself. And that's the tricky thing about it.
Oh, I feel that's the impression that he put on the reality, because he felt something there that a love that he didn't have for even the woman he had on the outside.
No, maybe, but he does mention, he's like, I own this place and business is booming, and you want to know why? That's why. So anyway,
I did want to bring up before we're done with this, the final episode of the series is called Bicameral Mind.
Yep.
And
which I referenced earlier. Anyway,
this is a fascinating thing. Yeah. Basically, the idea of the bicameral mind is that, I guess, when early humans were forced into a difficult situation, right? They heard voices inside their head that they thought were the voices of God, which were kind of telling them what to do and, how to react. As it turns out, that's just consciousness. That's your own head thinking back at you, which is exactly what happens with Dolores in this episode, and has been happening with a lot of the hosts. They are all hearing Arnold's voice, the voice of God,
as such, and God in quotes, sure.
And I thought it was brilliant when Arnold has his final, run in with Dolores at the end, where he has her murder him. Right before that, he's talking to her and he says, do you know what that voice is? And she says, right, this is the setup. When they're in the graveyard, he gives her the maze. Says, do you know what that voice is? And she's like, I don't understand what you mean. But when Ford has the same conversation with her at the end, 30 years in the future, she doesn't say anything, and then she gets it at the end. She's saying, oh, that's not Arnold talking to me. That's my own consciousness, talking to me and telling me, what to do, which I thought was brilliant. Like, just a completely brilliant move.
Sure, yeah, it's all a nice touch, and all of this shit is amazing, and we could probably make an episode of it unto itself. Yeah. But, I mean, it's all like... Here's the thing I can say, the most praise I can say. All this is very complex and heavy philosophical stuff. There's not really any answers to any of it. It's just been introduced throughout and handled, like, slapped into, like, ostensibly sort of an adventure-ish story at the outset, but then really isn't that. It's just taking all of these thematic elements and using them in various, like, small little subtle ways as applied to X character and their relationship to Y character, and, again, how to create and achieve consciousness as a whole. So I cannot give it credit enough for all that.
And we probably missed a lot of things.
There are others certainly we can introduce.
Are you kidding? We couldn't. I mean, we could. At any one point, we could do a whole episode about what Scott said.
We probably specifically missed the one thing that you, listener, wanted to hear about. So we apologize. But there is a lot of fascinating themes. This is just off a cursory watch.
Sure.
I imagine that you can write or do a lot of philosophizing.
I will be writing an article about this, and I'm sure many others will too. But
so I'm giving it the strongest of ones.
I have in my notes 1 exclamation point as the score for this.
I'm going to give it a 1 as well.
Oh, without question, yeah.
Okay. And on to antagonist with Chris.
Okay, let's just say for a character, definitely Robert Ford.
Maybe.
I like the way they position the Man in Black as a potential antagonist, which I kind of took in my notes, and I guess I'll get to this later, that he's also kind of a victim to it. A lot of times it turns out that their own selves can be an antagonist. It's a really complicated question as far as who the antagonist is. But if we're going to say antagonist catalyst, I'd have to say that Robert Ford could definitely fill at least part of that role.
So the reason I will agree with you about Robert Ford, although I liked Anthony Hopkins' portrayal, and I don't really think of him as necessarily a villain as per se.
But antagonist doesn't necessarily mean he's a villain.
Exactly. The thing is, it's a person who thinks he's a god coming to the realization that he's not. And him his last act is either an act of destruction or an act of atonement, depending on how you want to look at it.
Or both. Exactly.
And then, again, like you mentioned about the Man in Black, it makes him a tragic figure. And I kind of want to build, most of his ideas throughout that you see are Arnold's ideas. He builds himself an Arnold bot out of Bernard in order to have someone there who was really the impetus behind all of this.
Which is funny because when they were alive, they kind of clashed on what it was going to be.
Yeah, of course. That's like the harshly ironic, tragic thing about it.
And when you actually see the personal moments with Robert Ford, it's him with his family of robots, of clinging on to the past, of not
his
being able to let
family,
go.
He was recreated by Bot Style. Yeah.
And his newer family with Arnold.
Sure.
What was that?
Bernardo, yes.
Which makes him it's a very, very tragic figure. But I might agree with you that a lot of the issues that arise through this are set in motion by Robert Ford.
Well, see, my argument is, yes, of course, he's set up sort of as such. He's sort of like the puppet master behind the strings, pulling everybody's, programming everybody or manipulating them in some way, if not outright programming the host to do what he wants to get to his agenda. But then, because of the ending, see, I might argue for him as a protagonist and go with my sort of standard abstract thing as the true, quote, self-awareness is antagonizing everybody, because that has always been the case, or at least when you achieve consciousness, therefore you struggle with your own choices and so forth, even if you think they're programmed, if you're on some kind of fate loop, as we perhaps referenced in Wonderful Life. But all I'm saying is humanity, perhaps in general, not even that, any kind of sufficiently advanced mental state in which you struggle with your existence, and even if you think and or realize it might be false, a la Descartes or something like that. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm arguing for. I know I use that sort of thing a lot, but I think given sort of the nature of this entire series and who's involved in it, I will argue for that being the case.
Yeah, I don't know. I have a tough time with Ford, just because the final reveal makes it clear that he has been working towards.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying as well. Mm-hmm.
Something the entire time that you didn't believe beforehand, right? So yes, he is antagonizing some of the
board members and people.
Yeah, but board members aren't protagonists. I don't even see the Man in Black as a protagonist, really. I see Dolores.
Really? Okay, go on.
As a protagonist. I see.
Yeah, I agree with Dolores, sure.
To some extent, the Man in White.
We're talking about antagonist, though.
Right.
Oh,
who is he antagonizing?
You should have Occam razoring away who isn't.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out who he's antagonizing. I guess to some degree it's the hosts, but that's in order to drive them to the point that they need to be. Right? It's like like a hard-ass football coach getting your team to where he wants you to be.
But because you get to see the different timelines, it's an evolution of Robert Ford's character through. He's the one who invited the corporate people into the park, which caused Arnold to commit suicide. He's the people.
Yeah, but he's been trying to atone for his mistake for 30 years or whatever it's been. You know.
Sure.
That's the entire point of his final speech.
I only have one more thing to add in favor of my argument is that, as you just referenced, this is a park, it's a business, it's a theme thing. Like, it's very an elite one too. Like, it's implied that only few select people of wealth can afford to come here.
$40,000 a day.
Yeah, whatever. And that was back in the day.
Zimbabwe dollars, where everyone's a billionaire.
Whatever. No, it's implied like the very few times they do reference the outside and quote real world is like, yeah, we've taken care of all diseases. There's nothing, we've cured all like there's nothing else to do. Like we can't go anywhere else. Everyone's just sitting there like all content except for having purpose. So like that's why people come there. So I'm just saying that's another little aspect to consider why my argument is perhaps valid, or at least I'm calling that the antagonist regardless and giving it a 1.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with you, Scott, on the kind of more the problem of consciousness perhaps is the antagonist, you know? Which I really loved in this, but I mean, I'll give it a 1.
All right.
I could go down a rabbit hole on this, but I won't.
I think
that rabbit hole.
That every single main character has a direct antagonist, whether it's their pre-programmed responses or whether it's like, if you want to view the Man in Black as a protagonist, then he definitely has his demons that are chasing him. He's the antagonist to Dolores in many, many ways, but also Dolores' programming. There are many, that's the thing is, what's interesting about this work is it's not a strict, this person's the hero, this person's the villain antagonizing the hero. It's every single character has their own narrative arc, which works really well.
Which is also meta because that's literally what they have.
Yeah. So,
you know what I mean?
Hilarious. So I'm going to give that concept a 1.
Yeah.
I'm totally giving it a 1.
Cool.
All right, and on to Scott for protagonist.
All right, so like counter to what I just said, sort of, not quite, but here's how I do lump into the protagonist group, if you will, because it's sort of an ensemble piece. There are a lot of characters, and like you said, we follow. So number 1 for me is going to be Robert Ford, because you basically see his 30-year arc, but cut up into weird, disjointed pieces. So like I said, they want you to think he's some kind of villain, like he has some evil agenda or something like that. But no, you know by the end what happened and why he's doing what he's doing. I think William / Man in Black also counts. Like you said, he's maybe sort of like underneath him. Like he has his own reasons for coming back to the park and find something about himself, and you see him change and how the park changes him and his relationship with Dolores. Dolores then, of course, is the next one, the first AI. Like they said she was the first host built, oldest one in the park, and the first one to achieve consciousness with working with Arnold, or he realized he was achieving it when they first were building them. So then she's, remembering that sort of, and with his own little bicameral mind, goddish voice speaking to push her towards that and to hear it as her own voice. So I think those are kind of the big main 3. You might argue for some subplots like Sizemore, but no, he of course not a main character. Charlotte, they're all side characters. And again, in a really funny way that this whole world is built on a lot of side characters. So I think those are my main 3. And of course, I'm going to give them 1 on the strength of the acting of both Hopkins and Harris. And even Jimmy Simpson did a very good job as young William. So I think I'll call those 3. And perhaps you guys might want Target to add 1 more, but I'll leave that open. Those are my 3 for sure.
I'm going to add Maeve. And I think what's going to be interesting about this, there's going to be a lot of crossover, because I was just thinking about it. If you take, 1 or 2 storylines from any one time period, this could be its own movie. So the reason, there's going to be a lot of crossover is because, as Ian said, at one point or another, everybody plays a protagonist, antagonist, supporting character. But I'm definitely going to pick Maeve as one of the protagonists, because she unlocks a different part of this world that you're going, it's the host connection, a knowing connection to the outside world, to knowing a connection as to who she was. Cause I mean, her doing that came in the 4th or 5th episode. So she spent,
it started early. Yep.
half the series, directly knowing that she was a host and that these people were working on her. And, so I'm definitely going to say Maeve is one of them.
I absolutely agree with that. And I'm also going to throw in Bernard Arnold.
Yeah, I know. That's what I was waiting for.
I actually think he might be the most important character in this work. He might not have the most screen time, and he might not have the most emotionally.
Sure. A lot of things revolve around him.
But Arnold's legacy is directly responsible for almost every single action that happens in this
That's true.
episode, or in this series. Whether he is the voice of God speaking to the hosts, whether his code is influencing the world, whether his ghost is haunting Anthony Hopkins, and also as a robot, all of his actions, or as a host, all his actions. So I really have to give the strength of, and before I knew he was a host, Bernard was my favorite character. After he was revealed, I'm like, oh, still my favorite character.
Yeah, fair enough.
Bernardo's what is it? Bernardo?
Bernardo. It's easy to remember.
Yeah, I don't have anybody else to add. You guys have mentioned them all, and all really strong characters. And like you said, Chris, they kind of all have their own storylines and are supporting characters in other people's storylines and all that type of stuff. But I think those are the main. I think the ones that you guys named are the main characters. Ian, you saying that Bernard / Arnold is probably the most important, I think, is right on. Although, depending on where this Maeve storyline goes, which I'm not going to speculate or anything, but she could turn out to be an incredibly important character.
It's true, but not for the season.
Sure.
I mean, she's an important character for the season, but not for.
Well, I was going to say she is an incredibly important character for the season. I think she was one of the protagonists, but certainly not the most important. However, I thought that her storyline was fascinating. I don't have that much more to say. I'm going to give all these characters a 1. This was really tightly written, really good story.
1's all around?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Steven, continue talking with the supporting characters.
All right. I get all the easy ones. Right?
Name them all.
There's only 100 supporting characters in this show. I'm going to actually start off with probably my favorite, which was Lawrence.
Good choice. He was definitely awesome.
He gets dragged around with a noose around his neck for a couple episodes by Man in Black, and then ends up showing up in a few other places. He's just this just the actor has the perfect swagger to him for the part that he had to play, and I loved watching him every moment that he was on screen. He wasn't exactly chewing scenery, but he was perfect in every scene he was in.
Fit right in there.
There's I'll let you guys do your other supporting. If I have anybody else to add, I'll add them at the end.
I just have one thing to say. I'm not going to really actually mention anyone because there's too many people. But the fact that these hosts can be reprogrammed to have completely different
It's a
personalities.
genius casting move.
Yeah. But not only that, but you see different characters in different situations with completely different personalities.
Yeah.
And occasionally it'll be to the point where oh, that's a really good acting job. And another thing is actually, I will mention one person. The robot in the basement who Robert Ford
hangs
drinks
out with Ford.
Yeah.
he's an early one with an very animatronic motion.
Yeah.
So it was a great pantomime. So that's
Agreed. Yeah, like you said, Steve, there are so many of them. I could read them out. I wrote a bunch down. But I think I just have to mention, these aren't necessarily my favorite ones, but I like the fact when I realized it that the 2 lab techs, Felix and Sylvester, is a funny reference. They're the lab cats, if you will. Code Splits cats. And they're still, they tied into a lot of other characters. But like you said, just such a great ensemble piece and casting job all around that I liked every single character whenever they were on screen.
Yeah. And Felix is Tweety Bird. Don't forget about that.
Exactly.
Yep.
You're right. Good call.
I was just going to bring up Teresa and Elsie.
Yeah.
Teresa was the corporate person. You thought
Charlotte too is in there.
thought she basically had control, and then Elsie was just kind of like the tech person that helped unlock another thing. And I'm a fan of the actress I saw her in Raising Hope, so I thought she was great too.
all right. So that's 1's all around, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I will mention one more because Ian and I talked about off air. Armistice.
Oh yeah.
Is
Yeah.
awesome, and
My
also
God.
amazing name for her as a character.
Yep.
All right, so on to dialogue with me. There's great speeches in this. I think that the dialogue is perfect and haunting at times, especially the repetitions and how it can
Yes.
slowly change over time as the robots become, or the hosts become more aware. I think this was one of the highlights of the show was the strength of the dialogue. So,
As you say, it was really interesting to see the dialogue, change a little bit over time as the hosts become more aware. But I think perhaps the most impactful thing was when they got reset and it went back to how it was at first, and it was really it was like a hit to the heart every time that something like that happened.
Not true. That's a good point.
that was brilliant. As you said, the speeches are just, the whole entire last episode is like just speech upon speech of epicness.
No, I mean, I agree with all that. Yeah, it was definitely one of the strengths and highlights of the show. Like, but even compared to everything else, like, it was also perfectly worked in. I don't think it was like better than anything else per se. It was just as good, and even sort of lampshaded. Where there's a quick line where Ed Harris says, "Future Men in Black finds Lawrence because he's doing his own little narrative." He said, "Used to be a lot more eloquent, Lawrence." Like, to your point, and then you see him like when he first meets him back in the day, as like giving all these, and like, every speech that Ford gives and every interaction he says to anybody is fucking amazing. And I'll just give one other sort of anecdote example, not even from the show. I was a little bit ahead, and Ian asked me, "Did they have a scene with Hopkins and Harris?" I'm like, "Yes, of course they're going to have one, and it's just as good as you think it is going to be." So that's my exhibit.
Yeah.
And I think one of the two of you brought it up about the repetition, about, how the same dialogue could be reworded or it has different meaning. A lot of credit, and I don't know where this is going to go to, so I'm just throwing it in here because I think it goes part and parcel with the dialogue, is the editing on the show. Because the editing really manipulates the dialogue.
Maybe style, but because of that, it does that to the dialogue.
Yeah, I'm doing style next, so it'll lead into it. But yeah, I thought that really helped with the dialogue as well.
For sure.
And a strong one, in case you're wondering.
Speaking of repetition, though, I do want to watch this series again and reassess the dialogue.
Yeah, I think it does deserve a secondary watch for sure. At
nods
least
go, like, and how my foreknowledge will help me assess what is said at the moment. So, anyway, enough. That's one's all around.
Enough dialogue from you. It's going to be a one.
Style on to Chris.
All right. And I will probably write a longer thing in my blog, but I found the music to be incredible.
Yes.
I've been listening to the soundtrack all day. And when we were watching it, there's a scene in, I guess, the middle time period where young William is first met up with Dolores, and they go to this brothel. Dolores is trying to unlock, certain things. And basically this brothel, there's an orgy. And I remember it because because the whole show, basically, there's current pop songs in it, whether it's played by the player piano in the saloon, or whether it's something thematic like Paint It Black would be, where they kind of orchestrate it.
Or both. I'll speak about that, but go ahead.
Yeah, but in this specific scene, there was this pulse going on, and it turned out to be Nine Inch Nails, Something I Can Never Have, played by a string quartet. And it's interesting because William begins his journey with Dolores here. I mean, William's looking to find himself. Like, he went in here kind of hesitant to get involved, and this is where he gets involved. This is the first time Dolores meets herself, which is part of her evolution to be able to, contact herself. And then there's this whole thing where everybody's trying, these two characters, she in both time periods is trying to escape the park. William's trying to help her escape. He comes back, as the man in black, and he's trying to find the maze, and he needs Dolores to find the maze, and he gets to Dolores, and she said, the maze wasn't meant for you. And at the end, in the whole time, one of the things Dolores wants to do is escape the park and see the ocean. So she escapes the park and sees the ocean and dies in James Marsden's arms. And then basically, it turns out that all the board members are watching the end of this narrative that was constructed.
So it's perfectly shot.
So it's again the beginning of this arc, that where William's the catalyst and grows out of here. Something I Can Never Have is just such a perfect way it was such an appropriate, perfect thing. I have to give the music, as I said in our Star Trek podcast, if there's any supporting role that's not a physical performance, the music is just so important to the narrative of this movie. This TV show.
Yeah, well, it might as well be.
Yeah, it's a 10-part movie.
Feels like a movie.
We're in the golden age of television. But there's in the opening title credits, they show the map with the reminiscent of an eye. And I think it's very important for the attention to detail that goes into every single aspect. Whether they're inserting small clues early on for people to figure out. However,
no detail is wasted.
Yes.
Yeah. The opening credits became more and more relevant with each viewing.
And however, just to give an example of this, that in this basement, how far down is that basement? What is this? 66
like
levels,
bunker or whatever. Yeah.
Well, they're up the Monument Forum out in Utah.
The fact that they live in a bunker, basically.
They live in the fucking office that they work at, but it's so huge.
And all the humans live in this thing, while all of the hosts live in this beautiful landscape of the Wild Wild West. And it's the setting informs
another duality,
the thematics and characters, and every little detail in this is, again, as you mentioned, not wasted. And I have to give full credit for that.
It is great. I mean, I don't have that much to say because it's amazingly the score is amazing. But Chris, you nailed that. Like, all these little details are incredible, and Ian, you spoke about that. The cinematography is just awesome. I guess one little thing that I'll talk about is I love the lighting between like the bunker and the outside is so well done to make you feel kind of oppressed every time you're inside, and to make it feel super wide open every time you're outside, which I thought was really cool. And I definitely noticed it. Like, every time you make that switch, it's like this really...
It's always like a
like when you
huge
switch
vista,
to outside from inside, it's like a breath of fresh air, you know?
Yeah, for your screen, for sure.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you guys pretty much covered it, so I'll just, like, what I noticed is that they've used 5 Radiohead songs, and each one was appropriate, like you said, sort of like the Something I Can Never Have thing. But I didn't notice what songs they were at first until, like, a couple episodes in. I was like, oh, the saloon music is really awesome. Some old school player piano style. I'm like, it's fucking Black Hole Sun. Like, that's awesome. So, yeah, I mean, and like you said, just shot so well, like, even the close-ups when, like, on characters' faces and so forth, and they're, like, confronting each other as juxtaposed to the huge sweeping shots, and and then the oppressive corporate offices. So it was all amazingly done, top-notch, all the way around, all the way down, if you will.
I posted because the soundtrack came out last night. I literally bought it like this morning and been listening to it all day. I posted the main title theme, and I put the caveat: if you've not seen this show, listen to this, but do not look at the track list because there's potential spoilers just in the tracks. I mean, it's going to be a hindsight thing, but it's really great to discover it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that one's all around?
Yes, sure is.
Yeah.
Okay, and Scott, on to recommendation, which I think that we were gushing over this work. I think we already know.
Yeah, I mean, like, I can only say one thing that I'll have to give, all of us should give Ian credit for mentioning the show, because just a quick history. I remember hearing about it back in summer. I'm like, oh, it seems cool, but I wasn't quite sure what it was going to be, and I sort of forgot about it. Ian watched the first episode and was like, dude, you have to watch this. I think you're going to love it. And I was pretty much instantly hooked, and you probably will be too. And if you're like us, you already were. You've just seen it and probably were just as hooked as we were, and we're loving it every second of it. So hell yeah, fucking see it. I want to go to Westworld when it exists, but until then, I'll just keep watching it.
I was going to say I was halfway through the episode last night. I wanted to cry like basically the whole time because there is just there's so much viscera coming out of the TV with every speech.
But not literally, of course.
With every look, I mean, this show is like perfect, is like near perfect. And it's just like, I was so blown away that when the credits rolled and there's an after credit scene.
Yeah, did you guys catch that?
Yeah, it was awesome.
I didn't see it. What was it?
It was,
all right. So if you remember when the Maven, so forth were escaping, Armis's arm gets caught. So she's like, go, like, basically heroic sacrifice, leave me behind. I'll hold them off. And she sort of does. And then she jabs a knife to make her arm work to shoot the gun a little bit more as the next wave of security guys moves in. Then she cuts her arm off and like stalks off into the offices, and that was it.
Nice.
Covered in blood. It was amazing.
It's just, all I could say for like 20 minutes afterwards, like, that was amazing.
Yeah,
so I cannot recommend this enough. I mean, if you've gotten this far, you've probably already seen it, or just don't give a shit about spoilers.
It is, I mean, yeah, it's pretty...
I recommend our analysis of themes.
It's pretty intense. It's a pretty intense show. If you like violence, watch the show. If you like sex, watch the show. If you like really heady philosophy, watch the show. You know, if you like an amazing soundtrack, watch the show.
Yeah.
If you like awesome cinematography, watch the show. Like, you know what? If you're a human being over the age of let's say 15 years old, just watch the show. All right.
Or if you're a host who doesn't know it, watch the fucking show.
I like heady philosophy. And I remember when I first saw the episode, I told not only Scott and the crew here, but every single person I knew, hey, go watch the show. I want to talk about this.
Yes.
when it comes out. And fortunately, we are not doing that. So,
and if you have
have your programmer reset you.
Back.
Yeah, exactly. Reset you. Don't worry. When you're watching it, that's when you'll have the flashback. So
that's when you hear the voice of God, which would be us.
And I wouldn't go to Westworld. I would definitely go to Ancient Rome World, as in the original Westworld,
which film. They might do as a.
I thought you were going to go to Samurai World.
I was going to say Samurai World's there.
Yeah.
And the composer is Ramin Djawadi. He did Pacific Rim and Game of Thrones. I highly recommend this soundtrack.
And that's 10s all around for everyone and a 10 overall aggregate score. And before you ask, Steve-O, yes, going in, I
think it's a perfect 10.
Knew this was going to be a 10.
I almost suggested that we just do away with, just say 10s at the beginning of this and just go like right into
That was my original plan, to come in here and say, I'm giving it a 10. Do you know?
Nah, I rewrote you all to do it this way, so.
I was pretty certain that everybody was going to give it a 10 going in. I don't even have to ask.
Okay, well, I'm Jonathan Ian Manzer, and my delights all have violent ends, regardless if they're violent delights or not. With Stephen Ramosi.
Have a pleasant evening.
Chris Morgan.
Good evening.
And Scott Thurlow.
And I own this world by a majority share. Good night. This has been Bon Mots. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time. Music by Chris Morgan.
Editing and engineering by Jonathan Ian Manzer.
This has been a Los Angeles production. All rights reserved.